everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Psych Monologues. We are far away. We're not quite the 12 days of Christmas yet. We are 14 days away from Christmas. Everybody's scrambling. The levels of stress and anxiety have intensified and have cranked up to new levels. And so we move into more what I actually want to spend some time talking about. But before I do, let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Mitsch. I'm the host and creator of the Psych Monologues. And if you've never heard this before and somebody bribed you into listening to it, the Psych Monologues is a podcast that I started 2 years ago. Actually, its purpose was to continue some kind of dialogue around grief and loss with students that were graduating out of a class that I taught on grief and loss. And it just continued to morph from there. It has continued to evolve from there, but the purpose and the what do I always say, the focus of this podcast is exploring the intersection of faith and psychology and spiritual formation. And while that sounds like an odd triad, it is actually a very important one, I think. I just not too long ago had a conversation about how much our psychology interacts and influences our theology, what we gravitate to, what we feel comfortable with, and we don't even really identify that that's the case. And so that being part of it, I think we have to just identify it for what it is. I actually heard a sermon today, and unfortunately the pastor wandered into a territory that he thought he knew plenty about, that I would humbly disagree with him about the key terms, and he was talking about anxiety and worry. And I'm not going to get into it now, but it's just, there is something to be said and something to be learned from what we have learned in psychology. We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. To be able to benefit and to reap the useful information that comes out of psychology. Granted, there's a lot of it that actually is antagonistic to our faith, but there's a lot that isn't, because it's still describing humans, and we can use that information without buying hook, line, and sinker, or some of the other things that psychology tends to spew out, the contemporary psychology. So that impacts our faith. It impacts our faith in ways that either we have no idea how it's doing it, or we can be informed and we can find ways to understand that psychology has something to offer us. And actually, in some respects, I think it can inform our faith, the nature of what our faith is. And then also, how do I participate in this thing called faith? And that's what the word spiritual formation is really all about. So the Psych Monologues is a podcast that picks topics along the way. I'm kind of excited for the next one. It's very appropriate for the time of year that we're in. And there's some new developments that we'll see if they actually develop. That will be exciting to listen in on. The conversation I might get to have. So, now there's another thing, and I mentioned this last week, and I'll mention it again today, is that there is the official formation of a nonprofit called Stained Glass International, and SGI, as I've been referring to it, is a nonprofit. It is also tax exempt. We encourage people to support our mission. And they will get the benefits of a tax-deductible contribution to help us out on that. But SGI's mission is to equip, encourage, and empower the next generation of Christians to live authentically in relationship to Jesus, others, and with themselves. And one of the embedded parts of that is also dealing with and wrestling with their relationship with the church and even the people that populate it. And that's a whole other topic that I think we might be able to find our way into. But we seek to develop what I call an outpost for the heart and communities for the soul, someplace where we find ourselves safe enough to be able to shed the masks that we wear. I would call it a stained glass that we show people. And maybe on another episode, I will take more time to unpack that idea because I think it's a valuable one. I don't think that it's the gospel truth, but it is a valuable one. So to get into this topic, and this topic I've talked about before, and it bears repeating for a lack of a better way to put it. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Let's take a look at this topic that I think is very important for where people live, how they think, how they feel about living life with others, with themselves. And this is probably more about you and yourself than about anything else, because ultimately what flows out of your relationship with you flows into your relationships with others. And so it also impacts our relationship with Jesus. So the topic is this, and 2 episodes ago, because it was actually 5 weeks ago, I did a episode, and again, it was a repeat, called Accepting Grace. And why is it so hard for us to accept grace? And I looked at a variety of areas or a variety of reasons why we love to talk about grace, but we don't accept it. And there's a lot that goes into that. So I would refer you back if you want to try to get up to speed with what I'm providing the mirror image to, is this episode will be a complement to that one. Now, I say compliment, it doesn't mean it's being nice to the other episode. It fits together with the other episode because Brene Brown, foremost researcher on shame, has said that really the answer to shame is connection and belonging. And while I agree with that, I think there is an even bigger antidote to shame, and that's grace. So I'd refer you back to that, and if you're interested, go back and listen to that one first, and then come back to this one, and you can pick up where we left off. We're exactly at 8:25, so you know where to join back in this conversation. And the topic of this is the comfort of shame. And the minute that comes out of my mouth and people hear me say that, they tend to turn up their noses or scrunch up their noses like they've just smelled some rotten meat. Because it's like, how in the world, or literally, how in God's name could shame be comfortable? But that's exactly what I want to show you, and that's exactly why we don't get out of it. As a matter of fact, we fall back into it over and over and over again, and it betrays the things that we believe, not only about ourselves, but also about how I go about changing my behavior and changing my orientation of my heart. Because ultimately, when it comes right down to it, we would much rather focus on changing behavior than we would on what I call heart development, which is essentially what SGI is trying to do, is to create places, groups of people together that are a safe place for all of our heart, not just the acceptable parts, but for all of our heart. And so I want to spend some time talking about this thing called the comfort of shame. And one of the biggest questions that comes up is, and immediately people want to say, so what's the comfort? Why is it so comfortable? And I want to talk about first, why is it so powerful? because looking at its power might give us some insight into why it's so comfortable, okay? And I just saw this. It was just ran across the screen while I watched the hapless, literally hapless, Keystone Cops, otherwise known as the Denver Broncos. And it came across the screen as a commercial, and it was a short tease about part of the episode for 60 minutes, and it was talking about a girl that was addicted to social media. And the mom was saying, it's literally an addiction. And I would say there is no more powerful, shame-prone culture than what resides in social media. And you'll see why I say that, okay? So the question is this: where does all of its power come from? In the first place, all the power comes from it because it is tied to who I am, my identity. And so the power it holds is the threat it hangs over us of rejection and disconnection if we don't comply. And when I connect that to my identity, who I am, what makes me important, do other people consider me important, all of those sorts of things, it gains tremendous power, and it taps right into the propensities, even within our neurological systems, to create this hypervigilance of what's going on around us and what are people thinking and how are they seeing and what kind of people approve and like me, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's connected to our identity, and in a lot of cases, we use it to change other people's behaviors and protect ourselves. Now, what do I mean by changing other people's behavior? In a lot of cases, one of the things that we do, and I'll go to protecting ourselves first, is that when we make a mistake in a relationship with someone, I can't tell you how many times I have heard somebody say, I am the worst friend. I am horrible. And do you see what the identity is? And so there's a little embedded transaction in there that says, I am the worst friend. Tag, you're it. And you say, oh, no, that doesn't make you my worst friend. And then I step back and say, phew, I'm fine, thank you, let's move on. And now we've got this nice little dance going. So it changes others' behaviors. The other part of that, of changing other people's behaviors, is we know intuitively that shame is resident in the people that we talk to because we listen to it. Actually, we have the same language for it with one another because we practice that language in our heads with ourselves. So it's not only connected to our identity, it actually gives us power to change other people's behaviors and to keep ourselves protected from poor opinions. Now that takes us into an even bigger topic. See, this is like an unfolding journey that the farther in you go, the bigger it gets, because now I'm busy trying to control what other people think and what they perceive of me, and now we are full on embracing and walking in the world of comparisons, which is exactly what social media is really all about, right? And then it threatens our sense of belonging. I am at risk of feeling alone. Now, a lot of researchers would point out the fact that we have an epidemic of loneliness. And in a lot of cases, people do these kinds of things and engage and drink the poison of shame just to stay connected to someone else. Because if the other person leaves, I am alone, profoundly alone. And if I'm alone, then I have nothing because I don't count myself as something. And so we have this being cast out kind of thing and feeling. Ostracized. And In some communities in the past, it was called shunned. We feel shunned. And the reality is we're being rejected not for our inappropriate or unacceptable behavior. We're being rejected because of who we are. And that brings us back to identity again. Okay? So it's connected to our who we are, our identity. It threatens our sense of connection to people. And one of the biggest items, and I think the biggest, in my humble opinion, is that we lack the vocabulary to even understand it. And as long as we don't identify it, we don't have to deal with it. See, we don't have the words to describe it. And because we lack the ability to expose it, it's never seen, but always poisoning us. It's like being hooked up to an IV of poison. And the poison is such a trace amount that it builds up over time until I am thoroughly poisoned. And either I go full on with it and say, this is how the world works, this is how I handle relationships, this is how I handle myself, because how I handle myself impacts how I handle relating to other people, because of the person I see myself as being. So without the words, we lack the ability to actually respond to it. See, this is something that I've said over and over again. You cannot change what you will not name. And in a lot of cases, we don't have the words to describe it. And so what happens, without the words, we only experience it. And we don't develop any ability to engage in any kind of healthy self-awareness and self-monitoring and seeing when it's coming out of our mouths. And the more I have come to understand this, and I will say that I've been talking about shame for a long time. I've been in counseling and doing counseling with people for 40 years. But it was only within the last 8 to 10 years that I identified that it's actually shame. It was never clearly identified. Now, some of the problem is that what we have done in the Christian community is we have conflated together guilt and shame. We say it in the same breath as if there's the same thing. As a matter of fact, I think that blurs our ability to actually see it operate within our lives and the things we say. I mean, regrets are the oil of the engine of shame. Regrets are. We just feed more oil in there. It keeps running nice and smooth, and we will always be in a state of never enough. Did you catch that? Never enough. That is the language and voice of shame. And I have said it myself. So I'd say mea culpa. I've been in this boat as well. Is that I believe by the words never enough that there is a state of enoughness that once I reach it, everything will be fine. But the funny thing about the word enough, it is relative, which means I'm seeking to hit a goal that is constantly floating upward. Which means that when I get close, it just goes higher. And then I disappoint someone, and I say, well, I guess I'm just not enough. And then we're back to the races again. We're back to soaking in the shame. I mean, we are very much, in so many ways, like the frog in the frying pan. We are marinating in shame, and we don't even know it. And as Christians, we don't have words for it either. Because the words in Scripture do not capture the nuances that I'm talking about it now. It's not there. You can hear Paul talk about in Romans 1, I will not be ashamed of the gospel. And it's shame is used to silence me. But we don't make that connection. And we've been parented, and I'm not throwing any parent. I'm a parent, so I'm not throwing parents under the bus. We're just passing on to other people what we've already gotten as we were growing up. And that was mostly shame-based stuff. You should be ashamed of yourself. You're a bad boy. You're a bad girl. You need to shape up. And so probably one of the most succinct ways of thinking what shame is the definition that Brené Brown gives us. And shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. I would add, as a Christ follower, therefore unworthy of acceptance, belonging, and grace. I'll just let that sink in. Because the interesting thing about guilt and shame is that they are both based on self-evaluation. But one is based on, I did something bad, and I can correct it and do better the next time. Or shame that says, I am bad. So not only did I do something bad, I am bad. It's the very nature of who I am. And so when somebody says, I'm horrible, or I'm the worst friend ever, while it's innocuous and we smile at the drama that's contained in it or the exaggeration in it, because a lot of times people that are very aware and very driven to be a good friend will say that. And it tells you what their motivation is. Partly, not all of it, but partly. So let me divide these things up, because guilt and shame is based on the same process of me evaluating myself and monitoring myself and making certain conclusions about it. So what is it? And guilt is about our performance. Guilt can be adjusted. It can be changed relatively easily. Guilt is motivating. It motivates us to change because we are comparing our actions or behaviors against some standard, some unmoving standard or values or beliefs. And we compare it to that and say, I missed the mark. Which, by the way, in Scripture, missed the mark, we have a word, a very churchy word. It's called sin, is missing the mark. So in Christian terms, we oftentimes use the word conviction, because guilt is this motivating feeling and motivating us to action to change the behaviors, to bring them in line with our values and our beliefs and the things that we hold as good to do. That's what ethics are, okay? So guilt is about our performance, and it can be adjusted. Guilt is about comparing our actions against ethics, just to repeat a little bit. So what about shame? How is it different? Well, I said at the very beginning, I did something bad, and shame adds, and you are bad. And see, shame, instead of shame, guilt's about our performance, shame is about our person. And when shame enters the picture, and I believe that the only way to get away from this is that I have to adjust and change my person, which is a bigger topic than behavior, or even motivations for that matter. If I have to change my person, then all that's left for me is despair. Because I can't do that right away. I can. How do you change your personhood? Like, I've got to change my personality. What does that mean? I mean, if I change my number if you're a Enneagram freak, or the Myers-Briggs, INFP to INFJ, whatever. But see, that's not going to happen quickly. And because it won't happen quickly, we give up just as quickly. And so shame ends up comparing our worth and value as a person against a mythical ideal or a mythical standard of personhood, which usually can be simply reduced to perfectionism. Perfectionism. And it's not perfection in the biblical sense, because perfection in the biblical sense is being complete and mature and whole. But shame shatters us. It fragments us. And more often than not, over the course of my career, what I have seen is people that are poisoned by shame are far more likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors because they feel so hopeless to make anything change. And so a lot of the core element to suicide or depression or self-harming behaviors is shame. It's underlying it. It's a part of it. I'm not saying it's all of it, but that's a part of it. And see, the other thing it does in terms of how it impacts my person is oftentimes what it does is it silences us. See, we externalize it into, well, I'm not going to say anything because I'm not really all that helpful and I can't really ever be, and so I don't have anything to offer. See, I see this happen in my groups all the time. If people say, well, I'm not going to say anything because mine is not nearly as important or big as someone else's. And so we silence ourselves, and then we feel alone, and oftentimes we feel like people have abandoned us. And this is not about placing blame, but it is showing you that our thought process, our conclusions lead to certain behaviors. So either we silence ourselves and take another sip of the poison, or we lash out at others and we make them look small. And we compare them to that perfectionistic standard, that mythical ideal. So shame is about our person. And the reason it is so powerful, it threatens exposure. And when the masks get pulled off, or the mask gets pulled off, what we believe will happen is the only thing people will see is the judged and condemned parts of us. And we're absolutely convinced that if somebody saw the judged and condemned parts of us, they would believe about us what we believe about us. And so we keep the mask firmly on. We keep the stained glass firmly in place, putting forth an image for people to consume, to know about us, to think about us, to conclude about us, and we are safely ensconced behind the stained glass. And it's dark in there. And one of the things we have found out, and Brown has helped us find this, Dr. Brown has helped us find this, is that shame grows in darkness. There are a lot of things that grow in darkness, but one of it is the amount of lies and negative self-talk, and I get a little tired of that phrase because it doesn't even begin to capture it. Self-talk is like we just have a conversation. It's not that. This is just a full-on, ruthless dump truck of all the things that are bad about us. And so we're sure that if anybody saw those, they'd feel about us the way we feel about us, and therefore we will be ostracized. We will feel like the outsider, And so what we end up doing is I will hate me before you can hate me, because if you knew me the way I know me, you would make the same conclusion. And so when people are disappointed or I don't come through or I make a mistake, we believe people hate us because that's what we would do. That's the conclusion we would make. So with all of that background, let me land the plane and then throw out some ideas, because this helps us to understand why it is so comfortable. And I'll put it very succinctly, very easily. It's predictable. When something bad happens, we are convinced someone needs to pay the price. Someone needs to be punished, because that's the only way behavior changes. So it's predictable. When I do something bad, when I disappoint, when I make someone else sad, when I don't come through the way I should, which, by the way, that word is pretty, talk about a signal word. Should, there are lots of good, let me take a quick aside here. There are a lot of words in our vocabulary that betray things about us, and should is one of them. Now, let me be clear, there are lots of good shoulds. They're moral shoulds. It's good to tell the truth. It's good to be a reliable friend. It's good to be consistent. It's good. It should be that way. But there are thousands and thousands of shoulds we carry around in our own head about our behavior and what we do. And the funny thing about it is it floats. Because whatever I do that doesn't work out, doesn't have the desired results, we apply a should to it. I should have known better. I shouldn't have done that. And while that may be true, I'm feeling shame because if I shouldn't have done that, and because I did, I'm awful. I'm terrible. I'm horrible. So it's terribly predictable, and we underestimate how much we want a predictable world. We are always seeking certainty. As a matter of fact, we work so hard to impose certainty on plenty of things that are uncertain. And the worst part about that, when we do it, is we end up getting the very thing that we fear the most. Because oftentimes our overreaction to it. So it's predictable. It's completely predictable. The second thing it is, why is it so comfortable? Why do we keep going back to it? Because it's known and expected. As a matter of fact, I think some people, when you admit to doing something wrong to another person, you hurt their feelings, you were insensitive or whatever, they expect to see a display of shame. Not a valid admission of guilt. I behaved in a way that I shouldn't have. I was not a good friend to you at that time. I will seek to do it better the next time. See, in a lot of cases, when one of the ways that we give away how much shame we have is we make promises we can't keep. And so what do we say? Well, I'll never do that again. How do you know? How do you know? So it's predictable, and it makes the world predictable. That's why it's comfortable to us. It's known and expected in some cases. And the third thing is it resonates with what we already believe about ourselves. And you can believe, your identity in Christ, and that you're saved, and that you're in God's family, and you're engaging in sanctification, and you're changing, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the switch is flipped, and then when you disappoint somebody you care about, all that stuff gets thrown right out the window or ignored, or that's my Christian identity. Now my real one is showing. And I need to condemn it. I need to hate it. I need to loathe it. I need to get rid of it. And so the funny thing about shame is it creates this false illusion of actually controlling our behaviors and outcomes. See, the interesting thing about shame, not funny, it's not even remotely funny, but the interesting thing about shame is it actually insulates us from change, because we create the illusion of changing our behavior, of controlling our behavior, of guaranteeing certain outcomes that will change. But over time, it erodes. And it's an illusion for the situation, so the person isn't so mad, isn't so disappointed, isn't so sad, and they'll kind of let up on us a little bit, and we'll give ourselves some wiggle room, and then nothing really changes. I mean, shame's an incredibly insulating thing in our lives, and that's exactly why it's so comfortable, because we want status quo, even if it's a dysfunctional status quo. Now, another thing that it is, it's ordered and known. If somebody does something bad, somebody gets punished. It's ordered and known. It is predictable. It is logical. It connects up. And then the final thing is it resonates with what I already said that. The need for punishment and so forth. So it's so comfortable that we don't even pay attention to it anymore. And the reality is we live in the kind of culture, and we've adopted this same thing, is that comfort indicates that we're on the right track. And if that were true, and you were to watch elite athletes, they put themselves through a lot of discomfort. A lot of discomfort. To what end? To increase their performance. Now, their character doesn't come along for the ride in a lot of cases, not all, of course. But we desire comfort to our detriment of growth. And we get addicted to comfort and happiness, and we use that as the standard, and that's why we don't change. And so shame is intensely comfortable to us. It provides the desired outcomes for the time being, and that is the key phrase, for the time being. Lasting change will only come from embracing and accepting grace, because grace creates a space for us to embrace our own humanity. Condemning our humanity doesn't change behavior. Condemning it doesn't. We think it does. But we've made an error in the opposite direction. Because we're so afraid of being prideful and arrogant, we think that the only solution is self-deprecation and self-degradation. And it isn't. We'll say that simply. But that also requires us to live in this tension of trusting that the Holy Spirit is actually doing what it said it will do, and that is carrying us to the end in change and transformation. See, we settle for reformation because it's within our power. I can reform things in my behavior, but I don't have to trust anybody but me in reformation. Transformation, on the other hand, requires trust and relationship. And that is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, right? Ask anybody that tries to do the trust fall. And most people have a hard time doing it. Why? Because they don't trust the people who are supposed to catch them. And that happens even in our faith. Is that God leads us into experiences and wildernesses, and we don't trust his heart for us, and we don't label it as such. And then we use our usual tools of change, primarily shame, and we wonder why nothing changes. And it's because it's a cycle. We keep doing the same thing over and over again. And you've heard, when I say that, it might sound vaguely familiar for what you probably heard in addiction and recovery circles, the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And shame is the primary contributor to that cycle. And so, what is the alternative? And I would say, just simply go back and listen to episode 116. It's about accepting grace and accepting the fact that our change and our growth is built on trust and relationship, and it takes time, but it also takes learning, and it takes trust, and it takes a willingness to create the space that grace offers me to make those kinds of changes. See, the funny thing about the word change is that embedded in it is mistakes. The best part about change is the desired outcome. But we don't think about the process and what goes into that process. And in a lot of cases, the process is fraught with failure. And if failure occurs and that gets translated via shame as I am a failure, then you could forget about growing. Because grace is about growing and shame is about outcome. And there's a difference between those two things. So, why is it so comfortable? It's predictable. It's known. It resonates with what we already believe. It creates a false illusion of change when it doesn't happen. And it's ordered and known. So where do we go from here? And where we go is the most uncomfortable place possible. And that is to find an outpost for your heart. A community for your soul, that there are people that are part of that community and in that outpost, because in a lot of cases it feels like an outpost. And an outpost, by the very definition, is out on the edges of change, the frontier called change. But we gather together and are willing to take the mask off and beginning to dismantle our stained glass and be seen as we are. And what gets reflected back to us is the grace that other people have felt as well. And that is an entirely powerful possibility for change. And I'll end with this. It's an African proverb, and I think I may have mentioned it in other podcasts. The African proverb comes from accumulated wisdom in this particular community. And I was told it by a counselor who worked with people in various fields in Africa. And she said this, and it goes very easily, simply. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And on that point, I'll end. So, thank you so much for listening. It's been a joy and an honor to have you take 45 minutes of your time to sit down and listen to me talk about some of these topics. And this one's fairly typical, I think, of what is key, where our psychology and our faith and our spiritual formation and journey bind together. And the more we understand how they do that, then we can participate in that journey. So if you have any questions, please DM me your questions on Instagram at the Psych Monologues, or you can hit the website. Be sure to subscribe on the website, because new material and new content is going to be published before too long. On the website, it will begin to change to reflect the kind of expansion of the vision for SGI. That includes the Psych Monologues and includes other opportunities for content that are building this vision for the Outpost for the Heart. And so we have this new feature when you hit the website at drmitch.com, a pop-up window shows up and you can subscribe. You'll be notified when there's any new content, new blog, new podcast, whatever is updated there. So please subscribe. That's the quickest way to stay up to date. Of course, you can follow me on the various social media outlets. The three primary ones is Instagram at the Psych Monologues, like I mentioned, Facebook at ray.mitch, and LinkedIn, drmitch. Now remember, my last name is spelled Mitsch. And so this podcast, if you've enjoyed what I'm talking about and interested in other ones that I've done, you can listen to it on any of the outlets that you use to consume and listen to podcasts. So Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, wherever you find a podcast, you'll probably find us there under the Psych Monologues. And there's an opportunity even on the blog and on the website to comment and ask questions, and please engage in that. If you're interested in partnering with us, I am profoundly grateful. We are coming up on the end of the year, and if you're considering where to point your end-of-year donations, I would ask for you to consider us. We have two major emphases or focus points: the scholarship fund for alumni of students that have graduated to participate in silent retreats that I and a partner of mine put on twice a year. So to engage in a silent retreat, and that's a bigger topic that I don't want to take the time to describe, but it is, as it sounds, it's introducing students and former students to the ancient spiritual discipline of silence and solitude. So you can do that, and then also the other key kind of movement or emphasis in SGI is the building the outpost for the heart, and that emphasis helps to fund various resources and other things. So your tax-deductible gifts would be immensely appreciated, and I would be immensely grateful for your support. If you prefer to send a physical check, you can send it to Stained Glass International, P.O. Box 160, East Lake, Colorado 80614. Just make your check out to Stained Glass International or SGI, and that would be fine as well. There are donation buttons in the footer of each of the pages on the drmitch.com website, so you're welcome to use those as well. It will take you to a PayPal payment page. You can choose which one you want to give to, whether it's the Silent Retreat Fund or whether it's the Outpost Fund. You can contribute to either one, and that would be, like I said, we would be immensely grateful for your support. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Again, I thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. On a Sunday evening, I have another episode coming up. It will drop next Monday, the 19th. It would be the last time before Christmas that we'll have some opportunity to be together, and that will be there for your perusal if you're waiting. So join me again in a week. Until that time, love ya. Later. Bye.